for your Makwaba Battle Update TV no na Mr. Sen and our bachane so hit and man mamma subscribe send me drop in the latest news content or better bread now so on set Maccabi and when you be at ye na ya bora in Simnima at ye for Bagbin why reply Supreme Court judges no nani semina or can say want was he besina one tiasie the entire as a Supreme Court judges no get more self-involved in these matters. No, why? That why do want to but as you for Anzana Papa be replying, say, Minum say, Jagis ye good Supreme Court to dear a young coffee dear, and no dear, no doubt a young coffee dear. In the about Bagbin, Mizuka can say, if a homo etima borrow my, you should understand, baby, manipulation on a free. Na yebumre me na yentie ensem no yeba de ka ho no ye de amunsem bebremo.
It does, but why are we behaving as we're doing when in the past, in the previous 3 parliaments I've been in, such matters are discussed indoors at the leadership level? How is now playing out in the open? With whipping members to be agitated and showing off their machoism. What value does that serve?
What or who could be responsible for that?
I'm not interested in what or who. It is reflecting badly on Parliament. What we should do is, as for having controversy, it has always been with Parliament. The reason Parliament is called Parliament because a reflection of the various shades of ideas in the country. And it is expected, it is natural that members of Parliament will often disagree.
Is what we see today a failure on leadership or of leadership?
Well, I do not intend to make any value judgment on leadership, but for me, we are moving away from the values of Parliament, how Parliament had run over the years. We are demonstrating the worst part of us. Even in the past, there have always been significant differences between the minority and the majority. It is this time that we have almost equal members.
Well, let's bring in 2 people on this. Now, Dr. Rashid Draman, Executive Director of the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Martin Pebo is private legal practitioner, so he's going to be joining us in a bit. Dr. Rashid Draman, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on Ghana tonight.
Good evening.
So that's the latest right now with this standoff we have in Parliament. The Speaker has written back to the Supreme Court, questioning essentially its jurisdiction and even entertaining this suit by Afenyo Markin. And in the next 2 days, it's just the next 48 hours to watch. Again, is it not?
Yes, indeed, Alfred. And if care is not taken, this is the running battle that we are going to see between now and the end of the 8th Parliament, where, legal issues after legal issues would define the last chapter of this 8th Parliament, which is quite unfortunate. And I just heard the Right Honorable Joe Sewus, the First Deputy Speaker. And I mean, that is a view that I share, and I think that I've said this several times on your network, that this matter is not a legal matter. That the reason why we have the 275 people representing us is for them to go and sit down and talk. And that, I mean, there will be many times when things are difficult. And when things are difficult, that's when they have to show leadership. But what we see these days is the least kind of difficulty, then people run to the court for interpretation. And, like I said before, what this does is that it only weakens the hand of Parliament, which is already the weakest link in our democratic arrangement. The executive, as we know, is so powerful. I mean, everybody is calling for a review of the Constitution to reduce the powers of the executive. Now we are seeing a judiciary that is also very powerful. I mean, if what we are hearing from the Right Honorable Speaker right now, all the documents that you read that are before the court, questioning, why the Supreme Court is getting involved in this when it doesn't lie in the bosom of the court. I mean, it's for another level. And so, Alfred, when I sit down and think about all these, apart from, the fact that I repeat what I have said several times, this matter requires a political solution.
A political solution that must be initiated by who? There's been proposals that the president should step into this matter to call both the speaker and the chief justice, or in fact, the MPP and the NDC caucus leadership. What approach, what route should this intervention take? In what form, essentially?
Well, I think, the speaker, the chief justice, the president, I think need to have a conversation, maybe at the first instance, and then eventually involving the leadership of the two parties. We can run away from this for as long as we want. If this political solution is not found, we are going to end up with a situation where no work can be done in Parliament before December 7. And I think I repeat this because, if we want to use the legal approach, after one failed suit, another is going to emerge, and we are going to see an octopus of suits, if I can put it that way. That now becomes something that the courts cannot handle. And Alfred, the more I think about our constitutional arrangement and the separation of powers, which the Right Honorable Speaker made reference to, the more I ask myself a lot of questions. In the democratic architecture that we have, the courts have powers to declare what the executive or the legislature does unconstitutional. The president or the executive has the power to veto or to refuse with reasons what comes from Parliament, mostly if bills are passed. Parliament can impeach the president or censure his ministers or impeach them and so on. We saw an attempt recently on the former finance minister. But Alfred, the fundamental question is who checks the courts? Who checks the courts? And we cannot assume that the courts are perfect. We cannot assume that. They are human beings. So that when we say whatever the Supreme Court says is final, well, that's a matter of law. But as a student of politics, I'm just scratching my head and asking myself these questions. So how about when the Supreme Court is wrong? How about when the High Court is wrong, and it passes judgment that maybe is not challenged and nobody takes it up maybe to the Supreme Court? I mean, we can't assume that these people are infallible. So I think there is some maybe the lawyers might have to think about this.
Right.
For me, I get quite worried, and I think the worry is not very much on the side of the courts. The worry is very much on the side of our parliamentarians.
I see. Well, and it's at that point that you call in the lawyers and to answer that question that you asked. So I'm going to welcome Martin Pebo right now, who's joining us. He's private legal practitioner, one of the foremost human rights lawyers we have in this country. Lawyer Martin Pebo, good evening. Thank you for joining us on Ghana Tonight.
I can see. Good.
Well, so the latest, and I'm sure you've seen all the court documents right now. The Speaker of Parliament's lawyers have filed the processes urging the Supreme Court to set aside its orders, which stop the declaration of the 4 seats being vacant from coming into force. Essentially, the lawyers of the Speaker questioning the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and even entertaining this matter. This is one that you predicted, I recall.
Yes, that normally the right thing to do in these circumstances would be to go back to the court to ask the court to set aside the orders. Except right now, the other side to consider is that, is the court willing to eat humble pie? That's a great question to be answered. Is the Supreme Court willing to eat humble pie? Because, so I can say, I tell you, applying to the court is one thing. The court admitting that it was an error is a different kettle of fish. So that's that one that nobody can say with certainty. Unless, of course, they themselves see the turmoil they've thrown the country into, they think that, okay, they'll put their egos aside and do the needful, fine. But often in Ghana, it's not something that's easy to do. You remember how when Akufo-Addo threw out into this economic crater, we called upon him to admit and accept responsibility. You see, it never came. They rather kept blaming Russia and Ukraine. Then everybody got tired after we had all shouted ourselves hoarse. Then one day, in a very lame and banal manner, he said he will accept responsibility after the horses had bolted. So that's the key thing, because Mr. Counsel, let me tell you, in the law, using the Constitution and the Supreme Court decisions of Ghana and other countries, there is equal opportunity to eat humble pie as there is to double down or dig in their heels. Yes. As for the law, that's the way it is. Depending on which perspective you are coming from,
right,
you will get sufficient language and other cases to back you. So my point is that we can't say with certainty, except maybe perhaps with the consultations that Bagbin said they were doing behind the scenes. Maybe if they reach an agreement that, okay, yes,
right,
just go back to the court and things will be made easier, sure. But trust me, it's a big hurdle for the court to eat humble pie like this, especially in the manner in which the court has embarrassed the nation with all the turmoil. But it will be the right thing for them to do, because once they've caused so much havoc, they should be ready to pay the price.
Well, we'll see. In the next 48 hours, in fact, the court is set to hear this matter.
It's a form fancy way in Chumaka Yankopon Adama 7 December number 2 Basona let peace prevail no slogan and see a bomb on Kaya saying I am fear when you Yankopon Paye anymore my Ghana, not some so Emra or my Ghana.
Strike you as well.
Oh, yes, Africa. Good evening. I mean, what I can say is that the leadership of this country seems to be lamenting, just like any of us who don't have power. Because if you read their statement, it is empty, it is hollow. It contains nothing apart from the curfew. Because they are telling us, you see, this statement would further worsen the situation in Boko. Because they are recounting what, in their own opinion, is created this round of violence in Boko. They didn't need to tell us whether he was illegally or legally ensconced of assault. They didn't need to tell us. All they need to do is to let us know what they are doing. And so if you read the one-page statement, there's nothing in there apart from the curfew. And we are aware of curfew. In different parts of the country, when these things happen, you impose a curfew. The lazy man approach in dealing with situations like this. And so mine is that I'm not too sure why the executive leadership of this country seems to be lamenting. Instead of tackling, ensuring that probably the feuding parties, they bring them to a round table. I know there has been effort to attempt for a dialogue. That hasn't taken, that stopped or stalled some time ago. And so if the court Tamale or somewhere, rescinded the warrant. My point is that why can't we tell the feuding parties to go to courts? If you disagree on whatever is taking place, maybe that would, for me, why can't we put in pragmatic measures in ensuring that this whole thing probably comes down? But if you read the content of the statement coming from government, for me, Alfred, it is very, very hollow. It contains nothing apart from worsening an already bad situation, whilst people are dying. Whilst people are dying, government is in Accra lamenting just like any of us who have no power. That's what I can say, Alfred.
Dr. Bona, and you echoing the sentiments of many others, and I do appreciate your time on this matter. Thank you so much. Dr. Adam Bona is a security expert joining us here on Ghana Tonight. We were also live on 3FM 92.7, so beginning today until the next foreseeable future, 3FM 92.7, you can listen to us Ghana Tonight as well, and also on TV3 Ghana on Facebook.
And I must say, someone did daily update TV, so.